Okay, today's daf we're going to learn is Eruvin Yud Zayin. Today's daf is sponsored by Rochelle Chefetz in memory of her husband Leonard Chefetz on his Yuret site. Okay. We're going to start from I want to review the end of yesterday's daf. I have to say I feel like I didn't explain clearly enough, and I want to go through it so that it's very clear and we understand, and then it'll be the basis for what we start today. So I put it up on the sheet today to organize exactly what we had in the Mishnah, and we'll skip one little part in the Gemara, but we'll basically summarize the part of what we did in the Gemara yesterday. So the end of the Mishnah talked about the whole issue here was that we had a shayara. We had a group of people in a caravan. They went to camp in a certain place, and they get there and they don't have a lot of opportunities, so they start putting up ropes, right? They don't really have a wall. They can't put up a wall that's 10 tefachim tall. So they put up their ropes in a particular formation that halachically is okay, right? We have to get to a height of 10 tefachim, with using laws of Levud, where we basically say we view this as if it's a solid wall. As long as we have a rope and another rope that are less than 3 tefachim apart, we can view it as if it's a solid wall. And as long as we get to a height of 10, we're in good shape. Then the question was, is this only allowed because they're a big group of people? In other words, were there special dispensations made for certain circumstances? So Rabbi Yehuda says, B'shayara dibru, okay? And this is in the first chart on the sheet. Summarizing the last 4 things we saw, there's a machlok at Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis, and then Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda says this is just a shayara, and the rabbis said no, they just brought a case of a shayara, but really anyone can do this. The second machloket we saw, which was very similar to this one, was that Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says you cannot have a mechitza that's just horizontal or just vertical, because you can't have all these wide open spaces. Right? You can't have that, he says, okay, which we're going to question a little, right? We questioned already. What do you mean you can't have them? It seems like you can. We'll talk about that soon. The rabbi said, echad mishnei dvarim. No, one is sufficient. So there's a bunch of questions we're going to have, which is both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda seem to think you can't make these horizontal ropes, which seems very difficult because it seems they each say in other places you can. And that was what the Gemara brought up. What do you mean? Rabbi Yehuda said, lo hitiru liyachid, more than Beit Sa'atayim, a space more than 5,000 square amot. But they did allow them 5,000 square amot. Remember, that number came from the courtyard of the Mishkan. Remember, in general, we learn all these measurements from the Mishkan and the way things were then. Then they carried the agalot. That's how we got to 16 Amma. 16 Amma is the width of a Rishut Rabim. And there are all different measurements they learned from the Mishkan. This also. So they say that's a space for an individual, which is actually a pretty big space. And it sounds like, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you could carry there even if you have these horizontal ropes. So how did he say in our Mishnah? Only b'shayara. And same with Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. He says it has to be both shti and erev, both directions. And then he said elsewhere that a yachid gets beit sa'atayim. 2 people get beit sa'atayim, and 3 people already are a shayara, and they get 6 beit se'ah. So something doesn't jive here, and the Gemara basically answers, and this very interesting answer, which I didn't get to deal with enough yesterday, but the Gemara answers, what's the issue here? They do allow it, but they allow only within particular measurements, regardless of how much space you personally need. Meaning, and this is where we get to subjective and objective halacha. Some people have a lot of stuff and need, right? We all know this, right? Some people like to just get rid of stuff, and some people have lots of stuff. And the people who have lots of items and need space, well, that's what they're saying basically, sorry, you don't get everything you need. We're not going to allow you kol tzorkan. Okay, we're going to say yachid is limited. If you want to use, now again, if there's actual walls, well, you can have whatever space you want. But once we're using what we call mechitza gru'ah, a not very good mechitza, where it's got much more space than not, which we've been discussing is really a problem. But again, because we have the halachic concept of levud, we view it as if it's solid, but they're conscious of the fact that we're just viewing this as if it's solid, and it's not really a solid mechitza. So it's kind of in this in-between, and therefore come Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda, who's his father, and the 2 of them basically say, listen, we're not going to allow you everything because you're using this not great mechitza. If you're a lot of people, then we'll allow it. And even then, we're going to see that it's not always. If you're very few people, then we're not going to allow it even, right? We'll allow, again, everyone gets a certain measurement, and that's it. You don't get more than that. And here we're going to have a bit of a debate between Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and his father about when we allow and when we don't. Rabbi Yehuda, if you notice, says, B'shayara dibru. Shayara, according to Rabbi Yehuda, everything's allowed. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda even limited in a shayara. He said, even a shayara only gets 6, okay? Regardless of how many items you have and what you need. And that's the idea here. Okay, so that's what we saw yesterday. So let's just go, we'll start now where we ended yesterday from 6 lines from the bottom of Tetzayin Amud Bet. So that was the whole thing that we quoted Rav Nachman is saying, Lo nitzrichu ela litain lahem kol tzarkan. What they were trying to say is they don't get everything that they possibly need. They only get things that they only get a particular space. Okay, good. I'm now looking at the chat for a minute. How many people constitute a shayara? That's a good question. So here it seems very clear, 3. 3 people is a shayara, and we're going to compare this to later today. We're going to see about a machaneh. A machaneh is a group of people who go out to war. And there, some people actually claim there has to be 10, like our magic minion number, okay? That in order to be constituted a machaneh, and there's all sorts of heterim for people who go out to war, that it might be 10. Here it's 3 because it says 1 is this, 2 is that, right? 1 or 2 only get beit sa'atayim. Once you're 3, you already get more. Okay. So let's go on now. So Darish Rav Nachman Mishum Rabbeinu Shmuel. So now Rav Nachman says in the name of Rav Shmuel, I can't remember if we stopped here or a little further, but in any case, we'll start here. Yachid notnim lo beit sa'atayim, shnaim notnim lo beit sa'atayim, shlosha na'asu shayara v'nonim lan beit shesh. So now Rav Nachman teaches in the name of Shmuel that, here we go, a Yachid gets 2 se'ah, right, the 5,000 amot, 2 people also 2, and 3 people get a shayara, they're like a shayara already, here you have it, exactly what you asked, and they get beit shesh. So now they say to him, that's exactly Rabbi Yossi, but Rabbi Yehuda, how can you hold like him? Shavat Rabbanan ba'avet ki Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda? So Rav Nachman changes his mind. And he basically says, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Okay, right. I said yesterday, we're going to get to this, right? Elul, it's a good time to say, I made a mistake. I admit my mistake. He gets up in public. Okim Rav Nachman Emora Alei brings an Emora. It's kind of like his microphone to kind of tell everybody what he wants to say. Vidarash. And he teaches, here you have a great line, right? Sign of a good leader. Get up and say, I made a mistake. Biram, he says, however, this is what we should say. Kachamru. Yachid notnim lo beit sa'atayim. So far, it's the same as what he said. Shnayim notnim lo beit sa'atayim. They also only get beit sa'atayim. So far, that's just like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. But shlosha na'asu shayara v'nonim lem kol tzarkam. Once you're 3, you're already a shayara, you get everything you need. So now, that holds like the rabbis, that at that point, 3 people is a shayara, you get anything you need. Meaning, if you need more than 6, you get more than 6, you get whatever you need. So they say, wait a minute, Reisha Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda v'Sefer Rabbanan? How could it be that Rav Nachman paskined partly like Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda? He took like a bit from here and a bit from there, right? First he paskined fully like Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, then he did part. So now they say, yes, in fact, it's true. Mishum, he did hold partly like him and partly like him. Why? Mishum dekai avua b'shitate. Because when we're basically going to hold like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, in the case where he held like his father. Okay, he kind of took what his father said and went off a little bit more. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda, his father said, shayara, everything's allowed. Came Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda to say, doesn't work. Not in the shayara and not anywhere, although we ended up saying, well, it does work. It's just that it's limited to 6 for a shayara, 2 for 1 or 2 people. I see someone asked, why don't 2 people get 4? I think the assumption is that 2 people can suffice with 2. Okay, 2 is already like a pretty big, think about it. It's 5,000 square cubits is pretty large, and 2 people can suffice with that space. Because also it's kind of like saying, I can even think about how much food do you need for 1 person, how much food do you need for 2 people. When you buy for just 1 person, right, it's hard. When you buy for 2 people, you buy a little bit more and it goes for both of you, right? When you buy for 1 person, sometimes you need to buy more and you actually have 2 of you. If like 2 people would shop separately for each other or they'd shop together, they probably need less food together than they would each pay separately. So you could say that that's enough. But once you get to 3, we assume you need a lot of space. Everyone wants their own space. Everybody this. You're going to need more space. You could claim something along those lines. So now they say, well, when he holds like his father, we're going to end up paskening like him. And that's it. The shayara gets what, right? Again, Rabbi Yehuda said the shayara gets whatever he needs. In that case, we're not paskening like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. But in the beginning case, Rabbi Yehuda also thinks that 1 or 2 people only get a beit se'ah and they don't get whatever they need. And therefore, they hold like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda there, but they don't hold like him in the other case where Rabbi Yehuda also disagrees with the rabbis. And there we don't hold. We hold like Rabbi Yehuda that you get everything you need in a shayara. Amar Rav Gidel Amar Rav. Now Rav Gidel says the following. It's kind of, every once in a while they say, oh, here's something strange halachically. You could have a situation where shlosha b'chamesh asurim, 3 people within 5 beit se'ah would be forbidden. B'sheva mutarim, but in 7 it would be allowed. That seems kind of counterintuitive. Amrulo, so they said to him, Amar Rav Hachi, did Rav really say this? That makes no sense. Amar Lahu, so he says to them, Oraita nevi'ei uchtivei, I swear on the Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ktuvim, right? The Torah, the prophets, the writings. De Amar Rav Hachi, that I swear in the name of the Torah of the Bible that he said this. So now Rav Ashi comes to try to explain. He doesn't really say what he meant. So Amar Rav Ashi, my kasha, what was so hard for them? Dil mahachi ka'amar. Maybe this is what he's saying. He doesn't really mean a space of 5 and a space of 7. We're going to see. Again, we talk about that this is subjective. There's some people of a shayara that would need a lot, and there's some people that would need less. So we have these 3 people that constitute a shayara. Remember, shayara means just a caravan. It means a group of people, really. So he says like this. Let's say you have 3 people who need 6. V'hikifu b'sheva. But what did they do? They put ropes around a space of 7. Afilu b'sheva mutarim. They're allowed within this 7, even though they only need 6, because the issue is, I can't remember if we saw this yesterday. Yeah, we saw this yesterday. Ubevad shelo yehe beit sa'atayim panoi. Remember we said that it's in Chachamim. It's right before the 2 dots, 2 lines before in yesterday's daf. The rabbis said that echad yachid echad shayara, okay, the rabbis think everyone gets whatever they need. Notnim lam kol tzarkan, or sorry, notnim lam beit, sorry, I just lost my place. Echad yachid echad shayara, notnim lam kol tzarkan. They get whatever it is you need, the rabbis think. Ubevad shelo yehe beit sa'atayim panoi. But you can't have 5,000 square cubits that you're not using at all. Why is this? So it seems to me that, again, we're using ropes that don't really look like a mechitza, okay? But if they're surrounding the space that we're using, and you have 2 things, both, you see someone's using the space, and you have these ropes around it, and you have levud, where we're basically, right, according to halacha, we could view this as a solid wall. So we could say it's a solid wall. But if your ropes are surrounding nothing, basically, a space that you're not using, and if within those ropes, there's a gigantic space of 2 se'ah that you're not using at all, already we're not going to allow this, even in a shayara. Because again, it's all a matter of what this looks like. It doesn't really look like a mechitza surrounding an area of people that are using that space, which would then constitute private space that one can carry in, if there's tons of empty, dead space that nobody has. There's no people there, there's no items there. So it doesn't really make sense to allow that kind of thing. But here you would have a case where they need 6. They encircled an area of 7. Afilu b'sheva mutarim. They can use all those 7, even though theoretically there's a whole beit se'ah they don't need. That's fine, because they don't have 2 se'ah empty. But what does he mean? Shlosha b'chamesh asurim. Lo hutzruchu ela lechamesh. It's not that they carted off an area of 5. Here it's that they needed only 5, okay? Between the 3 people, they were able, right, the way they were living and their stuff, they only needed 5. The kifu b'sheva, but they put the partition around 7. Afilu b'chamesh asurim, they can't even use their 5. Forget about the extra 2, right? Which there we said, okay, they use 6, they can even carry in the 7th, right, and the extra one. But here, they're not even allowed to use the 5 that they sectioned off, because they sectioned off a much bigger space and there's 2 se'ah empty, the whole mechitza is invalid. So that's what he meant when he said, at least according to Rav Ashi, who's coming many generations later, explains that he must have meant 3 in 5 is a problem, meaning if they only need 5, okay? If they only need 5, then, and they section off 7, then it becomes a problem. Right? But if they need 6 and they section off 7, then that's okay. So then they say, wait, my love panoi me adam. So they say, wait a minute. Didn't we say as long as you don't leave Beit Atayim panoi? Now, what does panoi mean? Panoi doesn't mean from people. And if the assumption is one person takes an area of 2 Beit Se'ah. Now, the problem is that it's exactly as someone asked before, that what about 2? Wouldn't 2 mean 4? And we don't say that. But they're thinking right now, maybe 1 needs 2 Beit Se'ah, 2 needs 4, and 3 needs 6. So what do you mean it's panoi? How could you have it panoi from people? Everybody has their 2 se'ah, basically. So it's not really panoi from people. It's panoi from objects, right? That's what I said in the beginning, that people have stuff. And it might be panoi from stuff, but aren't we talking about people? And every person gets 2 se'ah. So how could you have a case of 3 people in only 5 beit se'ah? So they say, lo, panoi mikelim. No, really, when it means panoi, it means no objects there, okay? And even if a person maybe would take that space, we're really talking about their stuff. And therefore, you could have a case where 3 people have very few items they bring with them. And therefore, right, you see people traveling, right? Some people just have a knapsack and some people have a huge suitcase and, you know, they take 2 suitcases. So it's all about how you pack and how many things you have. And if you don't have that much stuff to fill up that space, then we go by how much you need. Make sure you don't have 2 se'ah open, and then you're fine. Okay, continuing on. Itmach. Now we're going to have a machloket between 2 amoraim. We're not going to know who says what, and then we're going to try to figure out who says what. And this brings us back to our laws of muktzah, if you remember. In muktzah, we kept saying if you have something that's not really usable, but you turned it usable before Shabbat started, and when Shabbat started, it was something useful. Or let's say you didn't, and then you decided to use it on Shabbat, right? That we said all the time that Shabbat determines, right? When Shabbat comes in, what was its status then? So now we're going to say what happens if you were shlosha, you were 3 people, and in the middle of Shabbat, meit echad mehem, one of them dies. Now you're only 2 people. Are you allowed to use this mechitza for only the 2 of you? Because now you're 2, and normally that wouldn't, if you have a space of beit se'ah, of 6 beit se'ah, okay, would that work? Or shnaim, let's say you were 2, and you made in a space of 6, but you weren't really allowed to. V'nitosfu alehem, and then more people came. So now you're more people living in that space. So would that work? So Rav Huna v'Rabbi Yitzchak, so they have a machloket. Chadamar Shabbat goremet, v'chadamar diurim gormim. One says it's Shabbat that determines. When Shabbat came in, that's the determining factor. If it was valid in the beginning of Shabbat, it's valid now. And the other one says, no, diurim gormim. It's important, not your mechitza per se, it's important who's living there right now. It goes by how many people. So if your mechitza wasn't good when Shabbat started because you were only 2 and you put it around the space of 6 beit se'ah, but now all of a sudden more people came, that's great because it all goes by how many people live in there. If someone died, no can do. Okay, you're stuck. So now they say, Tistayim de Rav Huna hu amar Shabbat goremet. Let's assume that Rav Huna is the one who says it all goes by Shabbat. However it was when Shabbat started, that determines it for the rest. The Amar Rabba, by me Rav Huna, Rabba says that they asked Rav Huna, Ubai me Rav Yehuda, and they asked from Rav Yehuda, Irev derech hapetach, vinistam hapetach. If you made an eruv through an entry way, like an opening, or derech hachalon, vinistam hachalon, you made it through this open window, and then the window seals up on Shabbat. Okay, something happens, the window got sealed, the opening got sealed, and it's no good anymore. Amrli, Shabbat ho'il v'hutra. So I had asked Rav Huna, and he asked Rav Yehuda, and the answer I got back was, since it was okay in the beginning of Shabbat, it's valid for all of Shabbat. So therefore, it must be that Rav Huna is the one who says it goes by how it was when Shabbat started. Lema, now they want to suggest that maybe this machloket between them is the same as a different machloket. And this goes to what happens when the Eruv falls on Shabbat, okay? Can you still carry, because it was from the beginning of Shabbat, or can you not? So Lema Rav Huna v'Rabbi Yitzchak beplugta to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda coming from the gate. Let's suggest that they have the same machloket as we see here. Ditnan, chatzir, and then it's a machloket tanaim. which makes it like an even stronger machloket. Each one side's on a different side of machloket Tanaim. Chatzer shenifritza mishtei ruchoteha. You have a chatzer, it has 4 walls, and then 2 of the walls fall on Shabbat. B'chein bayit shenifratz mishtei ruchoteha, or the walls of your house fall on Shabbat, but maybe a little less likely. B'chein mavoy, this is much more likely. Shenitzlu korotav o lechayav. Remember we had that case with Rav who was standing there. He asked the guy to bring him a jug of water, and the lechi fell. I think it was the lechi, and then he motions, no, don't come. It fell. So that's this case. We're going to see it. It's not so clear cut that it's a problem. So now a mavoy that the korah fell or the lechi fell. Right, this happens in a snowstorm or a thunderstorm. Right, it could fall. Right? Often you have cities where they tell you before Shabbat, is the Eruv up or is it not up in the winter, right? Here, what happens if it happens on Shabbat? So, mutarin la'ota Shabbat, va'asurin la'atid lavo divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that Shabbat, since when Shabbat came in, it was still up, it's valid. But next week, it's not going to be good anymore. Comes Rabbi Yossi and he says, Rabbi Yossi Omer, mutarin la'ota Shabbat, mutarin la'atid lavo. If you want to say it's okay today, if it works now, it should work next week also. What he's really trying to say is this next line, which is im asurim la'atid lavo. But if you're going to say it's forbidden in the future, then asurim la'ota Shabbat, then it's obviously forbidden now. And therefore, he says, once it falls down, it can't be fixed. Okay, it's basically invalid. Okay, and I just wanted to. There's some notes in the Koran about this that are interesting, and they say the halacha is in accordance with Rav Huna, okay, with regard to enclosed fields, and in accordance with Rabbi Yossi with regards to an alleyway that was breached on Shabbat. Okay, so we hold like Rabbi Yossi that it's no good. Okay, and I just want to see, Ho'il Vutra, right? There was some other thing here. Right. Okay, fine. We'll leave it at that. Okay. In any case. So now they suggest that Lema Rav Huna Rabbi Yitzchak, right now let's say that what? Lema Rav Huna Da'amar Rabbi Yehuda. He says, since it worked when Shabbat came in, it works now, right? He said that with the case of somebody dying. So likewise, or somebody adding to the crew, likewise, he'll say the same thing with the Eruv that falls or the walls that fall. And that if it was good at the beginning of Shabbat, it should be good going forward. And then Rabbi Yitzchak, Damar Rabbi Yossi, and the two said, no, we go by what it is now, would say it, right? They would obviously agree. So Amar L'cha Rav Huna, now we're going to say, no, not necessarily. There's 2 different things going on here in the 2 cases. And each one can basically say, both Rav Huna and Rabbi Yitzchak can say, oh, I agree with the other side. Okay, how so? Rav Huna can say, Ana da'amri afilu leRabbi Yossi. I would even agree with Rabbi Yossi when it comes to the Eruv that fell, won't be good, even though here, I think that people coming in would, right, the people coming in won't change things, but Eruv falling would. Why? Because there you're actually missing walls. Okay, your walls fell, or your lechi, or your korah. You can't possibly allow something like that. But you have walls here. Now they might not be the best walls ever because they're ropes with lots of space, but they're walls that we allowed, and we allowed it in this particular scenario. The fact that the scenario changed, it doesn't really matter. They're walls, right? So it's still, I would say it like this. It looks from the outside like a valid mechitza, basically. So it should work. For Rabbi Yitzchak Amar, Ana da'amri afilu leRabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yitzchak could say, no, I actually agree with Rabbi Yehuda. In the case that the Eruv fell, I would say it's still good. But just in the case where someone died, I would change things. Why? There, you still have all the people living in that space. And because of that, I would say, since it was good the beginning of Shabbat, now what's the, okay, I'll get to this in a second. But here, you don't have the people. The people is what's important. And this goes back to a really interesting question about the concept of mechitza. How does mechitza work? Eruv. How does Eruv work? We've talked about, there's 2 things. One is you need a wall enclosing all the people, or some semblance of a wall. Surata petach, lechi, korah, something that indicates there's a boundary here. But number 2, you need food to say we're together in this, right? And if one person isn't with you, that messes up the whole thing. So likewise here, it's the same thing. And then the question becomes, it's true you need both, and without both, it's a problem. But which one is more important? Is it more important that you have these walls And that's the, right? If the walls are there, we don't really care if what happened inside changed a little bit about who's there, who was, do we have 3 people to say we're a group or not? That's less significant. Or do we say no? What's important is the people. The walls are just symbolic of the fact that the people are together. But if there's an issue with the people, right? If the people are still there, then great. If there's an issue with the people, like one of them died, and we no longer need all this space anymore, then maybe the walls aren't valid anymore. So it's a matter of what's important. Is it the people and the people being together, or is it the walls that are symbolic of the fact that the people are together? So it's a matter of where do you put the stress on? It's interesting conceptually thinking about this whole thing of Eruv. Okay, last line before we get to the new Mishnah. V'chachamim omrim echad mishnei dvarim. Okay, now go back and you can look at the chart on the sheet. If you have the sheet in front of you, we had Rabbi Yehuda says b'shayara dibru, and then the rabbi said lo dibru b'shayara ela behoveh. They just brought that as an example, but they really mean any case. You can use these ropes. It's no problem, even an individual. Then we have Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda says you can't have your machitza going in only one direction. It has to go in both directions, meaning it has to be filled in. And the rabbi said, no, you can do it horizontally or vertically. It's fine. So now they say, what's the difference between the 2 chachamim? They seem to be saying the same thing, right? Hainu Tanakama. The chachamim who disagree with Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, it just sounds like it's 3 opinions and not 4 opinions the way it's set up in the Mishnah. So they say, Ika benayu yachib b'yishuv. What's the difference? When Rabbi Yehuda said b'shayara dibru, and then the chachamim said lo dibru b'shayara ela behoveh, what they meant to say is, even an individual who's out and about and gets stuck in a place and needs to put up ropes can do it. But in the second one, the Chachamim say, you can either make them horizontally, you can make them vertically, it doesn't matter. He's not talking specifically about a group that was stuck out in the boondocks, right? He can mean anywhere, even in a yeshuv, a settled town. So basically, it sounds like the first Tanakam is only allowing it, the first Chachamim is only allowing it if you're out like in a desert or something like that, where you're kind of stuck. The second Chachamim sounds like they're allowing it in any situation. Okay, so that's just important to know. Okay, Mishnah, new Mishnah. Now we get to something interesting about things that we allow for soldiers. Okay, the assumption is we're talking about, as I said before, some people think to be a machaneh, which we're going to call it, you need to have arba'at dvarim patru b'machaneh. There were 4 things they allowed in a machaneh. A machaneh means a troop of soldiers. Some people say it has to be 10. Not so clear. We're clearly talking about, we'll see this right away in the Bright, they quote in the Gemara, what we call a mechemet reshut. They're out for a voluntary war, not for mechemet mitzvah, which is conquering the land and certain things like that, where there it's a mitzvah to go out to war, and there we're going to allow even more than this. But here we're talking about optional situation where there's a war or some sort of encampment of soldiers. We're going to allow them all sorts of things. I was thinking this is like when you go around Israel and there's all these signs, Chayal gets a free coffee, or, free coffee for Chayalim, free this, or, people give them, right? My son was guarding in Latrun, and he said, it was so much fun because usually he's on base, and here he was in Latrun and everyone was buying him ice cream and this, and, people just bring soldiers things. And here we're going to see that soldiers are allowed to do things, right? They're allowed to take things even, which is very interesting. So there's 4 things they allowed. Mivi'im eitzim mikom makom. If they want to make a fire, they can take wood from anywhere. They can steal, basically. Upturim mirechitzat yadayim. They don't have to do netilat yadayim. Okay, we're going to talk about which one. Is it mayim rishonim? Is it mayim achronim? Before you eat or after you eat? Umi demai. Okay, this we saw before. This is when you have fruits and vegetables that you're not sure if somebody took trumot masrot, the tithes, or I never remember how to pronounce that word, tithes or tiz. Anyway, I think it's tithes. So if you're not sure, normally you have to take the trumot masrot, and here we say you don't have to. Umila arev, and they don't have to do eruv, and that's obviously why it's here. Gemara is going to ask, is it eruv chatzerot? Is it eruv tchumim? Does it mean you can walk outside the city limits? Or do they mean eruv for carrying purposes? Obviously, because it's here, it probably means for carrying purposes. So now the Gemara starts, Tanu Rabanan. Machana yotzet lemochemet hareshut, here you have it. If they're going out for a voluntary war, mutarim begezel etzim yeveshim. They can steal dry wood. Dry wood is obviously the better wood because you want to use it for kindling. Wet, right? We're going to see later, even wet, some people think anyone can take from other people. Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema omer, af chonim b'chol makom. There's other things I want to add to this list. You can also camp anywhere you want. Somebody would decide camp in somebody's field, you're allowed to do that. And where you die, that's where you get buried. Okay, you can bury them even if it belongs to someone's property. You're allowed to bury them wherever it is if they die. Okay, and this is what's the reason? Because they're worried that soldiers might not bury. If you don't allow them to bury in an easy manner, they're busy with other things, and they might not end up burying him. For kvod hamet, right? We don't want to allow a dead body just to be lying there, so we allow you to bury him wherever it is that he died. Mutarim begezel etzim yeveshim. So we're going to go one by one. You can steal dry wood. Hai takanta diyoshua hava. What do you mean? This is allowed only for a machaneh, a group of soldiers. Everyone can do this. Yoshua instituted the following takana when they got to land, and this doesn't mean Yoshua for fighting purposes, the first years that they were fighting. No, he told everybody when they got to the land, did 10 takanot, I think it was, and here's 2 of them. Damar mar, asarat naim, yeah, there's 10. Hitna Yoshua, sheyuhu mar'im bechorshim, they can have their animals graze in plowed fields. Umelaktim etzim mistotehem, and you can gather wood from people's trees, from people's fields. So why would you say it's only allowed for the machaneh? It seems to be allowed for everybody. It's a little interesting that he allowed all this. So anyway, the answer, hatam behizmi vehigi. There they allowed thorns and bushes like that, but not actual, right, hacha b'shar etzim. That was like the bad stuff he allowed people to take from. But your good stuff, no, that you're not allowed, and that we allow soldiers to take. Inami, that's one answer. We're going to have 3 answers. Inami, hata b'mechubarim, hata b'tlushim, that hacha b'tlushim, there, it's things that are attached to the ground you can steal. But if the owner cut the wood, we don't allow you to take it. Here he put in all this effort to cut his wood, and you're going to go steal his wood that he cut? No, you can take other wood, but you can't steal the wood. You can take what's attached, but not, and yet the soldiers are allowed to take what he already cut. Inami hatam b'lachim hacha b'yeveshim. People have 2 types of wood. One is wet. Now, if it's wet, moist, I would say, not wet, but moist, it's hard for kindling. So that's not so useful. That you're allowed to take. But you can't take his good kindling wood. However, the soldiers are allowed to take the good kindling wood. Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema omer, af chonim b'chol makom u'makom shenergim sham nikbarim. So now they say, pshita, this is obvious. You don't need to say this. Meit mitzvahu. A soldier who dies out in the field is considered a meit mitzvah. What's a meit mitzvah? A very interesting halacha. In Daf Mishalahem, they go in depth into this topic for this week. Find it on the website or on Facebook. Shir and Chamatal discuss what's meit mitzvah have to do with Eruvin. What's the connection? Anyway, obvious, this is a meit mitzvah. What's a meit mitzvah? It's somebody who doesn't have anyone else to deal with him. He doesn't have relatives. He doesn't have, right? There's no one to deal with. This, even a Kohen, for example, is allowed to be matame l'meit in order to help bury a meit mitzvah, because it's such an important thing. And if someone's left with no one to bury him, we're worried the person's never going to get buried, and therefore we allow all sorts of things. And meit mitzvah, koneh makomo. What do we know about a meit mitzvah? You get to bury him wherever he died, even if it's in somebody's property. So therefore, isn't this also a meit mitzvah? So it's not a unique halacha by a machaneh. It would be any meit mitzvah, and he's just in the category of meit mitzvah. So they say, lo tzricha af agav di'itle kovrin. Okay, we're turning the page. You can already see we're ending the first parak. Anyway, what's the case here? Where you have a soldier, just because it's a soldier doesn't mean he doesn't have relatives who can deal with him. Rashi even says, yeshlo yorshim, he has people who are inheriting him. That means he's not a meit mitzvah. So here you might say, well, he's a soldier, but he's not a meit mitzvah. That's not the same thing. And therefore, that's what it's coming to teach you. How do we know what constitutes meit mitzvah? We're going to bring the following braita. Ezehu meit mitzvah, kol she'en lo kovrim. Anyone who doesn't have relatives to bury him, that's a meit mitzvah. Or achirim onim oto, but yet if, okay, even if you have no relatives, but if achirim onim oto, ein ze meit mitzvah. If he calls out, koreh, and people answer, then he is not a meit mitzvah. This is a very strange thing. What do you mean he calls out? He's dead. Well, who's he calling? So some people say what it means is when he were alive, where he died, let's say, he called out and no one would come, then he's a meit mitzvah. But if somebody would come, then already he's not considered a meit mitzvah if people would hear him. Some people say we're talking about if you find the body and you call out and say, is there anybody here? And people answer you and they come to help, then already it's not a meit mitzvah because there's people who are there to deal with it. So there's a debate about what exactly, there's a few other ways to understand this because it's a very strange who's calling and who's answering and what are we talking about exactly. But those are 2 explanations. So in any case, what do you see? A meit mitzvah is someone who has no one else to bury him. In this case, he has someone to bury him, and therefore he wouldn't be koneh makomo because he was a meit mitzvah, but he is koneh makomo because he's a machaneh. Now they say, umei mitzvah koneh makomo? Mei mitzvah, really? You can bury wherever he dies? Wait a minute. Hatanya, it says in a braita, hamotzei meit mutal b'sratya. If you find a dead person, a person dead in the street, right? Stratya, remember, is strata, like street. Mifaneu liyamina stratya, or l'smala stratya. You move him either to the right or to the left. Now, let's say you have two options in front of you to move him to. Stable or stenil. You have a field that was not plowed yet, and you have a field that was plowed. Right? Obviously, this is private property at this point. Better mifaneu l'stable. Better put him in the unplowed field because right, the plowed field, someone's planning to plant there. You don't want your dead body there. Stay near, but stay zera. What if there's a plowed field on one side and a planted field on the other side? So obviously the plowed field is better to plant because it's not planted yet. Mifaneu l'stay near, even though he's planning to plant there, still better the plowed field. Hayush tehen nirot. What if on both sides they're both plowed, or shtehen zerot, or they're both planted, or shtehen boot, or they're both not? Mifaneu l'chol ruach sheyirtzeh. Then you can pick whichever one you want. So now what do you see? Here you took this meit mitzvah and you moved it. He wasn't koneh makomo. You couldn't bury him in the middle of the street. So now what do they say? Amar baby, vevai hacha b'meit mutal al hametzara skinan. Now the issue really here is not only he didn't get his place in the street, but you have your choice. In other words, you would have thought just bring him to the closest place possible, right? So if you don't want to bury him in the street, so move him as close as possible to the street. It doesn't matter if it's plowed or planted or anything else. But here it says, right, start choosing which one is a better one. So what do they say? This is classic. This is kind of like muktzah, okay? That, he's in the middle of the road. Now, what's the issue? There's something else conflicting. What's the conflict? If you bury him in the middle of the street, Kohanim will not be able to walk on that street anymore because Kohen can't be in a place where there's a dead body. So you definitely don't want to bury him on the street, even though, right, we have on the one hand, you have to take care of the meit mitzvah. On the other hand, you don't want a Kohen on the street. So what do we say? Mifaneu. Once we allow you to move him, we say, okay, he doesn't get buried right there. Once we're going to move, well, now make a good decision, right? When you don't have to decide at all, right? You get to bury him right where he is. Doesn't matter if it's plowed, planted, anything. But if already you're moving him from somewhere, why is this? This is like muktzah. You can't move a muktzah item. But let's say you're allowed to move it because you need the space on the table and it's one of those things that you're allowed to move. Once you pick it up, you don't have to move it from the table and drop it immediately on the floor as if, oh, I can't touch this. No, you can move it. Once you pick it up and it's allowed, you can move it to wherever you want. Put it in the drawer where you want it to be. That's fine. Okay, this is the same kind of idea. Okay, moving on. Okay, you can wash hands. So you're exempt from washing your hands. Amar Abaye, lo shanu ela mayim rishonim. What we're exempting you from is washing before you eat bread. Aval mayim achronim, but the water that you wash with after the meal, which is funny because this is a much less customary thing to do nowadays, right? Some people do mayim achronim, many people don't wash after the meal, but do wash before the meal. Mayim achronim chova, it's obligatory. Remember, we discussed this already in Brachot. Why is this chova, and why do the soldiers even have to do this? There's salt from stone in the food, and it was known to, or it's potentially in your food, and it's known to be very dangerous. If you take that salt and you touch if it's on your hands and you touch your eyes with it, you could go blind. And because of that, they didn't want people to not wash their hands after eating because they were worried they might have a little salt on their hands. Amar Abaye, now they're just telling you some things about the salt. A quart is like a teeny drop of salt. Even a teeny drop of this could be found in a whole huge core of salt. And therefore, you have to be very careful because even a small amount could blind you. What if he's not eating? Mayim achronim, we assume, is after you eat. What if you're dealing with salt? You're working with it, but you're not eating. Do you have to do mayim achronim? So Amarle, halo mebaya, there's no question. Obviously, you have to. Because, right, and this is interesting. What's the reason? Right? You touched it. The whole issue with eating and saying, mayim achronim is chova, you probably think when you ate, you don't think you really have salt on your hands. But the rabbis are saying you better wash your hands because you might have some remnant of it. If you're actually working with it and you're using your hands and you're touching the salt, of course you have to wash your hands. They don't even need to tell you that because it's just obvious, right? These are safety issues, okay? There are some that think the mayim achronim has to do with other things. But The main reason, and this is why many people aren't careful about it anymore, because don't do this, because we don't have this salt anymore in our food, and we're not worried about becoming blind from touching our eyes, and that's why people don't do it. But in their days, they were very careful about it. So that the soldiers still have to do. Umi demai, okay, again, they don't have to take trumot masrot on food that already, right, that there's a doubt about. You got it from an Amaretz. Amaretz, generally, we know they did truma for the Kohen, but they didn't necessarily take maser for the Levi and the other masrot. So you're not sure what to do with it. Generally, you have to take truma masrot. But if you're a soldier, you don't. It's not machilim et aniyim demai ve'et achsanya demai. Achsanya, usually an achsanya in Hebrew is a guest house. Achsanya comes from guest. It actually comes, according to the Koran, it's very interesting. It says it comes from the root xenia, like xenophobia. And it says it means hospitality shown to a guest or strangers. It comes from stranger, right? Fear of strangers. So it's strangers. So here you have someone who's a stranger to the area because they're soldiers. They don't really belong here. They don't live here. So you're allowed to give aniyim, poor people, and the achsanya, which is the soldiers. Rav Huna says, and we actually saw this source before also, Tana Beit Shammai omrim em machilim et aniyim d'mai ve'et achsanya d'mai, Beit Hillel omrim machilim et aniyim d'mai ve'et achsanya d'mai. Okay, there's a machloka Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai says no, Beit Hillel says yes. Umi la'arev, and they can do an eruv, right? They don't have to do an eruv, sorry. They don't have to. Amri debei Rabbi Yana, lo shanu elu eruvei chatzerot. We're talking here only about, they don't have to do an eruv to allow carrying. Aval eruvei tchumin chayavim. But in order to walk 2,000 amma outside the city, you have to. Why is this? If you remember, we've seen this debate whether eruvei tchumin is deoraita or derabanan. Rabbi Akiva says it's deoraita, it's by Torah law. There's a whole debate about the one who says it's derabanan. Does he mean the measurement of alpayim amma is derabanan, but deoraita, you can't walk yud-bet meal, 12 meal, which is a much larger amount. Or some people think that no, they think there's no issue on a deoraita level. Anyway, we'll get to that when we get to eruvei tchumin later in the Masechet. Matkefla Rabbi Yonatan. Okay, so here. He says, eruvei tchumin chayavin. How do we know this? Ditani Rabbi Chiyad brings the following braita: Lokin al eruvei tchumin dvar Torah. You get lashes for that from the Torah. So there you see, that's according to Rabbi Akiva. And therefore, it can't be that we allow them not to do this. Matkefla Rabbi Yonatan. Rabbi Yonatan says, wait a minute. Lokin al eruvei tchumin, you get lashes for it? V'chi lokin alav shebe'al. Where do we learn it from in the Torah? Al yetzei ish mimkomo. You can't leave your place on Shabbat. They learn eruvei tchumim from this pasuk. So it says al. It doesn't say lo. Usually it says don't do this. Here it says al. It's a different wording. We learn you don't get lashes from al. You only get it if it says lo, like lo tignov or something like that. Matkefla Ravacha Bar Yaakov elameata dichtiv al tifnu ala avot ve'ela yidonim. What you're going to say? You don't get punished for going to an Baal Ov or Yidoni, those people who bring up the dead spirits? Of course you do. Hachanami, delolake, what? You're going to say you don't get lashes? Of course you do. And there it just says al, so what are you talking about? So they change Rabbi Yonatan's question. They say it must be we misunderstood. Rabbi Yonatan hachi kashele. Lav shenitan l'asharat mita beitin. Wait a minute. This is a lav. Al yetzei ish mikomo means two things. It means don't leave the space where you're in, meaning eruvei tchumin, and it also means al yotzi ish mimkomo. Don't take out from the place you're in, meaning don't carry from private to public. So what do you see here? It's also something that you're supposed to get mitabetim for, which is carrying. So alav shenitan l'asharat mitabetin ein lokin alav. There's a principle that says if there's one lotase and from it there's some things that you would get death penalty for, then you don't get lashes for some other part of it. So that's why you shouldn't get lashes. So Amar Rav Ashi, miktiv al yotzi, al yetzei. It doesn't say don't take out, it says don't leave. It's not talking about carrying, it's only talking about eruvei tchumin, and therefore you can't get lashes for it. Hadran alach mavoy. With this, we finished the first parak. I just thought it was an interesting point that we end with these issues about who's, right, this camp and how we have to take care of other people is kind of this idea of space and my space and your space and joint spaces, and that sometimes there's people who are outside our space but who we're supposed to take care of, like the poor people and the soldiers, and it's kind of moving out of our space to bring people into our space. So I thought that was interesting if you think about the idea of space and the concepts discussed here. Okay, we'll quickly start the next Mishnah. Osim pasim lebira'ot. This is good review because we've already talked about this. This is when you have a well, and now we're going to see it inside. You have a well in the middle of the street, picture number 124. You make these little corner. It's like the corner pieces of a puzzle. Okay, now we're going to see. It's 4, right? The like puzzle pieces, they go out in 2 directions. Okay, so it's 4 that are like 8 because it looks like 8 because each one goes in 2 directions. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir omer shmona nira'im k'shneim. You need 8 that look like 12. How is that? Arba jumodim. Remember we said dio is like dio, like duo, like 2. So 4 that look like 8. Plus he adds in that in the middle of each wall, each side, you're supposed to add 1 more. Okay, to make it look more like a wall. It's still parutz merubal made, much more open than solid, but still, right? But you still have to put something in there. So he says arba modim and arba pshutin. That's just solid ones, not with 2 sides. Now, how tall? Govhan are classic. 10 tvachim, 10 tvachim off the ground. Birochban shisha. They have to be 6 tvachim long, and ovyan, the thickness could be kol shehu. Ubenehem kimalosh dever vakot shel shalosh bakar dever Rabbi Meir. In between, here's picture number 126. You need to have 2 yokes that hold 3 oxen each. Okay, that's the idea here. And you see the 3. You see they're facing different directions. That's going to come up in 1 minute. Rabbi Yehuda omer shel arba kshurot velo mutarot. You need 4, not 3. But kshurot tied together, meaning 3 a little more packed together, not loose. Because if they're loose, they'll be standing farther away. So the measurement is, and that's how we got to before. We talked 10 for Rabbi Meir, 10 amot, and Rabbi Yehuda, it was 13 1/3. Echad nechneset ve'echad yotzet. Okay, 1 pack is going one way and 1 pack is facing the other direction. That's how you measure the size. By the way, this 4 comes up in kilaim also. If you remember, they would plow in packs of 4, and that's where Rabbi Yehuda says 4. It's a pack of the way they would generally go in packs of 4. We'll see why Rabbi Meir disagrees and says 3. Anyway, we'll stop here for today. We'll pick up with the rest of the Mishnah tomorrow. Have a good day, everybody.